So thanks for coming. I'm going to start off with a bit of an artist talk, and then go into the show and just sort of talk about the process of how I got here, the concepts behind the show, the ideas that sort of brought it together, and then dive into the individual pieces as we go. I'm just going to drop the link to the show into the chat for anybody who would like to follow along, or if you haven't had a chance to see it in its entirety yet, you can just click on that link there, and the whole show exists on that link. The show is titled Sculpted in Our Image and Forged in Our Minds, and it consists of 5 media arts pieces, as well as an additional screening, which will be taking place next week. And so with all that, let's get into it. So hello, my name is Tristan Sauer, and I am here today to talk to you about my show at Interaxis. So how did I get here? So as Megan had so kindly mentioned, I'm an alumni of X University. I graduated from the New Media BFA program there back in 2020. And during my time at X University, I had the chance to be the project coordinator at Meta, which is what is essentially our end of year grad show at the time. And this is a little demo animation made by one of my friends, Chia Mian, for the show. So as the project coordinator at Meta, I had the opportunity to facilitate with artists, look for venue spaces, organize fundraising, coordinate with the design team, and just sort of take on all facets of what was necessary to run a production at the scale of a curatorial project. And that was really where my interest in curating and my interest in curatorial practices emerged from. And graduating from the program, I went on to be interested in pursuing opportunities like Meta going forward. Unfortunately, at the time, I graduated into the pandemic. So the show that I had worked on for the better half of that year had kind of been washed off the face of the earth and never really got a chance to see itself displayed in an in-person presentation, which was a shame. But going forward, I knew that this was still something that I wanted to pursue in my future. Entering the pandemic, however, it was pretty apparent at the time that the art scene was in a bit of a recovery phase. So as I was seeking out curatorial opportunities, I knew that there really wasn't much at my disposal to tap into as someone who didn't have any tangible experience under my belt. But I said to myself, if no opportunities exist, make your own. And that's what led me into the formation of Symbiosis Gallery. So Symbiosis is a digital art space and gallery dedicated to the presentation and curation of emerging web-based new media artists and curators. You can follow us on Instagram, and then we also have a website, which I can drop in the chat as well, if anyone wants to check it out. And Symbiosis was sort of an introductory point for me in getting into what I've now worked on at Interaxis, which was an interest in digital presentation and curating, not just as an adaptive way for digital presentation, but curating specifically for digital presentation. And I found that at the time, especially in the early days of the pandemic, while curating was adjusting to the new digital world that we found ourselves in, a lot of it was as a reaction to a lack of physical space without a priority on emphasizing the power that digital space and digital curation can bring about. So far at Symbiosis, we've curated 4 shows, 2 open call shows, 1 collaboration with the Generative Artists Club, and a solo exhibition by Mads Brimble, who is also conveniently in the show at Interaxis, which is a nice tie-in to have her work both on Symbiosis and then also to display her work further on in another digital exhibition here. And while I was exploring myself as a curator, I also found my way into working with the Toronto-based arts and music collective Long Winter. This is a quick grab from one of our recent live events from late last year, which really showed me a lot about the different facets and experimental ways that one can curate for not just an online, but also in-person settings. I've also, as Megan mentioned, displayed at the Plumb. This was a piece of work that I created mid last year titled Black Bodies for Sale. which was a repurposed gacha vending machine or gachapon vending machine, fitted with 3D printed parts that were all resemblant of symbols indicative of Black power throughout history. And you could pay $2 and purchase one of these, purchase one of these objects and take it home with you and collect it. And it was sort of a commentary on the way that social justice is often intersected with capitalism and the adverse effects to that intersection. And so a lot of that and a lot of what I was thinking about led me into evolving my curatorial practice in a way that had critical focuses on technology and on the different facets of our society at its core, which was something that I found key when going into this project and sort of exploring the themes that I went forward with. So yeah, and that all brought me to Interaxis. So as some of you might know, Interaxis runs a program annually titled the IA Currents Program, which is a program dedicated to helping the growth of careers of emerging curators, much like myself. This year I had the opportunity to be selected as the curator. And yeah, I'm very happy to be working with Interaxis on this project. So the project in question is titled Sculpted in Our Image and Forged in Our Minds. There's a little blurb here, and if you go to the website, there's also an essay which will kind of detail a lot of what I'm talking about, and I encourage you to read it if you're interested. But Sculpted in Our Image and Forged in Our Minds, as I mentioned previously, is a fully digital show that exists on this website and was created with the intention of creating a show that was specifically curated for a digital environment. So as you'll see as we go through the works, all of the works exist as net art, and for most contexts couldn't really be removed from that digital setting without being significantly warped, which was really important to me when going through the selection process of the work. So thematically, the exhibition is focused on the juxtapositions, both the similarities and differences between two beings that have existed throughout thousands of years of human history and pop culture and folklore, and that being the golem and the robot. So I was really interested in the way that the stories of the golem and the robot, the golem obviously being, countless years older than the robot in our modern day pop culture, but I was just interested in the way that their narratives, though seemingly different on surface, are actually quite similar at their core. If anything, I'd almost view the robot as the continuation of the story of the golem. Where the golem left off, the robot sort of continued with that same narrative. Both of them are autonomous beings. Both of them are created in a way to be subservient to humankind, and they're both imbued with some sort of power that gives them life. And they both somehow still manage to be very relevant parts of our pop culture to this day. And there's things about both of their stories and mythologies that really interest us and teach us about technology and also our humanity in the way that we interact with sentience and new emergent tech. So the golem, for example, that the figure at the top left, the clay golem that you saw previously, is a representation of the Golem of Prague, which is probably the oldest rendition of the golem story. But we've seen the golem through countless other examples of pop culture. There's the Reggies from Pokemon. There's the golems from video games like World of Warcraft and Dungeons and Dragons, and Clash of Clans, and Minecraft. There's the Iron Guardians that we see from the movie Castle in the Sky. And so we see very similar tropes, and though not all of these beings are called golems, we see very similar tropes between all of these creatures and what ties them into this narrative. They're often humanoid in shape, often autonomous, imbued with magic, and generally constructed out of some natural material. So usually that is stone or clay, but there's also examples of metal and ice seen throughout this narrative. But they share that one cohesive tie to their mythology. And so, as I mentioned before, the golem originally came from Jewish folklore, from the story of the Golem of Prague, where the golem was created as a method of protecting the Jewish people of Prague at the time from anti-Semitic attacks. And the story ends in different ways. There are different interpretations to the tale as it's been slightly rewritten at points in history, but generally it ends with the golem sort of entering this frenzy and then being dismantled and stored in the top of a tower in pieces, sealed away from the human eye for the rest of history. And you know, that narrative of the man-made creation kind of breaking loose of its captor and wreaking destruction is something we've seen countless times told in the narrative of the robot, which I thought was very interesting. And the robot is probably even more ubiquitous to most of us in terms of pop culture, with like countless and countless examples, some of which are fictional, and then many of which are real and have still managed to find their way into pop culture. So for example, fictional, we have things like R2-D2, Terminator, RoboCop, WALL-E, and Ultron, which a lot of times these narratives seem to play with this idea of sentience, this idea of life, this idea of like both beyond humanism and also like transhumanism, and this narrative of sort of like playing with God almost. And then in real life, we see things like Pepper and Sophia the robot, and the Boston Dynamics dog. And examples like Sophia the robot are popular now for the way that they've sort of clashed with our updated perception of what the uncanny valley looks like as they start getting deeper and deeper into this trench. I feel like most people that are familiar with Sophia are quite uncomfortable with her existence for the most part. And yeah, and it's just sort of this like emergent technology of AI and how it's being used to create these beings that are seemingly more and more human, and are more and more realistic as humans. Just a brief history of the robot. The robot actually came from a play. The playwright's name skipped my mind at the moment, but it was titled Rossum's Universal Robots. So these here are the original robots. Automatons that existed for many years before that, but these were the first examples to use the actual name robots. And it kind of just came from there. And there's a great quote from this play, which sort of brings all of this together, which this quote directly refers to the robots in the play and goes, "Workers who lack nothing but souls, they couldn't love, they couldn't have feelings, but they could do all the work that humans preferred not to do." And so I think this quote still rings true for how we view modern day robots, or how we project onto inventions that we would consider robots in the modern day. So something like Alexa, for example, which is undeniably a robot in its own sense. I'd hope doesn't have a soul, but we view the robot in the same way that the golem's original creation was meant to be, but as tools to do the work that we as humans either cannot do or prefer not to do, as we continue to sort of like automate our society. And so coming back to putting these two beings side by side, we can see a lot of really interesting similarities between these two that are often seen as differences. So for example, the golem being originally imbued by mystic powers, while the robot was originally imbued by electricity and code. The golem is often sculpted from clay or stone, while the robot is often forged in metal or made out of plastics. And so though those differences exist, in a way, they kind of end up being the exact same narrative. I like to think a lot of the time, even though we can think about what code and electricity tangibly are compared to what mystic powers would be, code to most people is still an inaccessible language. It's the vast minority of the population works with code on a daily basis and understands it to the level that runs autonomous creatures like robots. So for all intents and purposes, in our modern day and age, code still is seen as a mystic power. So the narrative, at least to me, hasn't really shifted that far from how the golem was described in a lot of these old stories. So this is interesting because it means that what we used to view as the divine that would power beings like the golem, humans have now replaced with technology. Our circuit boards and our codes and our processors are what now gift life to these autonomous creatures. And so we've sort of interjected ourselves into this narrative as the divine gifting life to these new autonomous creatures. Where the golem story ended, the robot story has sort of now begun. And so there were many dichotomies here that I was exploring. Obviously, the golem and the robot, the materiality of the difference between materials like clay and steel, magic and technology, the supernatural and man-made. And then what that really honed into was this divide between physical and digital. If there's one key difference between the robot and the golem, it's that the golem only existed in a physical world, but the robot doesn't always need to rely on the existence of the physical body and is often viewed more of as a digital being than it is as a physical being. And so this dichotomy was really interesting because it gave a clear threshold as to where the narratives sort of split off. And I was really interested in exploring and seeing if I could erode that threshold, because in modern day, it feels as if our digital and our physical worlds have slowly become closer and closer to the point where they're no longer truly indistinguishable from each other. It may have felt like in the past that you could simply log off and step away from technology, but as emergent technologies such as facial recognition and increased biometrics and just the abundance of wearable tech and pocket carry tech that we have around, we're almost always connected to the internet or the digital world more than we ever were previously. And this all really drove me into this idea of the difference between dreams and simulations, and how that is sort of the epitome of our view of, our view of experiencing our world, and then the robot's own view of experiencing that world. So we can do things like dream up new realities, dream up new ideas, and dream up new futures. And the robot's interpretation of that, or the robot's attempt at that, is simulation. So this usually differs to the fact that we dream quite unconsciously, but robots will run processes over and over again through simulations to try to determine some outcome or create some sort of, to simulate some sort of desired effect. But I was really interested in the divide there and how exploring dreams and simulations can teach us about one another, like what we can learn about simulations from dreams and what we can learn about dreams from simulations. And if our digital and physical worlds truly are intersecting at that point, what differs the two of these terms? And so going into it, I was looking for a good plethora of mediums, everything from VR to video games, renders, immersive environments, video art, interactive art, generative art, machine learning, simulation art, creative code, and you'll see a good mix of it. Obviously, not all of these art forms are represented in the exhibition, but you'll see a good mix of the selected work that I think captured what I was going for. And so we'll dive right in. The first piece in the exhibition was Zoom Princess by Sarah Boo, which is a video art piece about the titular character Zoom Princess, who is sitting in her room the day before some sort of event, either like a job interview, and is exploring Zoom. And so Sarah in this work was exploring Zoom as what she would like to describe as an unsocial media. So Zoom in this context is obviously referring to the software Zoom, the software we are sitting on right now and talking with each other. And so, so Sarah's background, she had originally worked in a more corporate environment where Zoom had been ubiquitous with, corporate lingo and capitalist endeavors, and just a world that is seemingly very detached from the arts world where we are now existing in here. And when the pandemic hit, Zoom sort of became ubiquitous with all of our lives. I had personally never heard about Zoom prior to the pandemic, and then just a little over a year later, Zoom is now probably the #1 way that most people communicate face-to-face over the internet. And so it was an interesting exploration into how exactly, or what exactly we are allowing to change, and what power we are giving over to big tech companies like Zoom and also like Facebook and Google when we allow them such access to our lives. And we've already seen backlash and criticism over the way that companies like Facebook and Google, with unchecked access to surveillance and data mining and the spread of misinformation and propaganda, have been catastrophic in certain areas of our society and the world. And questioning what we pose to lose when we are providing a company like Zoom the exact same access. We also see an exploration here of the webcam as a wormhole, sort of a tying the physical space between two sides of the webcam together via this exploration of how we grant access to these corporations. So if the webcam acts as a wormhole, then Zoom has access to not just our image and our likeness and our words, but our minds and our bodies and our spaces. And it's interesting to think about what how all of our socialization being filtered through a medium and a platform like Zoom, how that has changed the way that we communicate, the way we socialize, and the way we interact with each other online primarily, but how that's changed forever as it's being filtered through the lens of one singular tech company. And yeah, so the video really goes into a lot of these themes. It handles it in a very experimental style. And I was interested primarily in the way that Zoom Princess is seen as this being that both exists in the physical world, but also is somewhat of a digital navigator herself, that she could be existing in this digital world beyond the webcam and is tapping into us in the same way that we tap into each other via Zoom. And it was just an interesting exploration of a lot of that. Moving on to the next piece is Speciation by Mads Brimble. So Speciation is a recreation of a physical body of work that Mads has been working on for a long period of time and has now been transitioned into a digital version of itself. So Speciation is an exploration of creating generated organisms from a genetic algorithm that Mads has coded. And so I have a few videos of this genetic algorithm in the works. So what you can see here is that Mads is taking these shapes that are feeding off of parents. So the shape will have around 2 parents and will reproduce via a fitness rating to create more fit versions of itself. And the piece is sort of in defiance of the heteronormative ideas that have surrounded what we talk about in natural selection. And Mads has even quoted this as a method of unnatural selection, and is sort of interested in the ways that natural selection excludes queer narratives from its definition. And this piece explores how when we remove the barriers of heteronormity from the process of natural selection, how amazing and beautiful stories and creations can sort of spur out of the removal of those barriers and the deconstruction of those definitions. So what you're seeing here through these runs are the algorithm selecting the most fit shape at the end, and then Mads is taking those shapes and constructing sculptures out of them. So traditionally, as I mentioned before, she was primarily working with sheet acrylics. So this is an example of her physical practice. So these shapes would be taken to a laser cutter and removed from the laser cutter and then assembled into these really beautiful, colorful sculptures that catch the light and are just wonderful to look at. And you can see them being taken off the machine here. And it's interesting that though she's responsible for the construction of these sculptures and how they sort of sit in a line together, all of the shapes and the shapes that she is cutting out here and that she ends up with are completely out of her control, as they are like entirely generated computationally, which is a really interesting process and is a really interesting conversation between our computational, this computational reality and then the physical world that she's bringing them into. And so when we were ideating bringing this piece into the show, we had to figure out a way to take it out of that physical world and bring it into the digital world. And so the piece exists now as this beautiful series of renders. So you can see two of them here. And Mads has gone through the exact same process that she would with her physical practice, but has instead done it in a digital way. So these renders are two of the three that she has as part of the exhibition, and I think are just equally as beautiful as they look in person. And you can see, glimpses of the shapes you saw from the genetic algorithm example sort of spotted in here and combined into these, what she calls organisms. And we were also ideating ways that it could further be removed from the digital world or further like blur the line between the digital and the physical world. So if you scan this QR code, it's also on the website. So you don't have to do this right now, but you can view all of the work in AR as well. And we were really interested in how AR is almost a literal, melding of this space, where you have this digital asset, you have this digital creation, but you can walk around it and interact with it and move it and view it in your own physical space. So sort of playing with the same themes that we had talked about previously in Sarah's work, through AR, we're once again viewing the webcam as this wormhole where Mads's organisms can escape their digital reality and once again walk amongst the physical world, but in a less tangible sense than they did when they were constructed out of acrylic. Moving on, the next piece is Antichamber by Benjamin Chang. And Antichamber is a sort of a mix between a labyrinth and a traditional choose your own adventure style story. So you start as this being that wakes up in a bed at the beginning of the antechamber, and you're given options as to how you want to traverse. Generally, you're given 3 options whenever you approach a room, and you can decide which one you would like to go down. And as you traverse these hallways, different narratives and different visuals and approaches and voiceovers come out, and it's just a really interesting piece that you can continuously go back to. I've played through it numerous times and it's been different almost every single time as I try to like pick new options so I can hit every single room. And there's a little map that that Ben had showed me earlier in the production. So all of these little nodes are examples of rooms that exist in the antechamber, and then you can see these hallways that connect them all together. And one interesting thing about it is that throughout the narrative, your character will always restart at the beginning of the chamber. And it sort of creates this like cyclical pattern where you're almost like infinitely in this world. And Ben uses that in a lot of ways to critique certain things like capitalism and just like our general perception of infinity. And through that same exploration of infinity, he's sort of proclaiming that the digital space that exists within the antechamber is really no different than the physical space that we traverse in real life. So though you walk the hallways of this on your computer screen, the antechamber still takes up physical space. And we'll see that explored more in some other pieces in the show as well. I have a few little taglines out of the experience that I really liked. The Antechamber is also really focused on this illusion of choice, which really plays into the sort of cyclical nature of you continuously rebounding to the start of the experience, where though you're given the option of choice as you traverse through the world, you are still sort of trapped in this maze. And your choices mean little when the end and the beginning are melded into one over and over and over again. Ben is also exploring things like in the second line, that same intertwinedness that I was just speaking about. And in the third line, questioning how we are imbued with life and sort of like diving deeper into the question of how the beings that are populating the antechamber are imbued with life via the program that was used to design it, or us as the player navigating the space. And I like this last one, you become a productive member of society, which plays when you head straight through the first room, then you choose the cube section, you end up in this office space where all these characters are sort of typing away at computers, and it's sort of a narrative about capitalism. And I just enjoy Ben's attention to detail to sort of make it the straight and narrow path is the one that immediately critiques capitalism, which I thought was a really nice touch. The antechamber is also populated with these like clown-like beings. They don different outfits depending on the room you're in, but they're just really interesting examples that at some points they're mocking you, at some points they are simply bystanders to your existence in the space. And they work with a lot of different narratives that are being expressed through the piece. A lot about absurdism and sort of just the absurdity of trying to derive meaning out of infinity and out of the universe and this like infinite space that we occupy. And like at the bottom, it says digital beings, through the same interpretation that the space in the antechamber is indistinguishable from the space in real life. These beings can also be seen that way. And the clown motif sort of comes from the trickster, which is a character that is present in numerous religions and mythologies from all over the world. And it, once again, is added to the canon of the world of the antechamber. So moving on, we come up to Arcadia Inc., which is a piece by Cezar Mocan. And so Arcadia Inc. is this really wonderful simulated world that Cezar has created. I believe it's approximately 4 kilometers by 4 kilometers. And looks like to the eye, just a large sprawling landscape with mountains and plants and weather events going on. And Cezar has populated them with these 3 agents that work for the fictitious company Arcadia Inc. And so Arcadia Inc. is this company that creates what they call context-free landscape photography. So basically, Arcadia Inc. Acknowledges the fact that landscape photography has sort of become this tool of the corporate world, as we see it donning things like desktop backgrounds very synonymously, like base Apple desktop backgrounds are generally images of like mountains or sand dunes, and acknowledging the fact that through this like corporate use of these images, a lot of these landscapes are robbed of their cultural and spiritual and religious contexts that make them so important to the people and the societies that live in and around them. And so to Arcadia Inc., the solution of this is to create context-free landscape photography. So the photography that is captured within this digital world is freed from the context of our world and is thus able to exist in a way that is no longer problematic in that nature. And so you can go onto the Arcadia Inc. website, which I'll drop in the chat as well for anyone who's interested. And you can just scroll through and download these images that the agents have taken and use them as your desktop backgrounds. And you see they kind of go through different times of day. And I really enjoy the ones where the agents are caught and present in the video. So there's 3 agents in the world. And so you can see here, one has captured 2, and then here's another one capturing one of the others. And I pulled one of Cezar's videos. This is a Meet the Team video about the agents, which will sort of give you a better, just gonna skip a little ahead, a better understanding of who they are.
I'm Ansel AI, virtual being and landscape photographer with Arcadia Incorporated. I take photographs for the computer desktop.
I'm Ralph W.E., virtual being and landscape photographer with Arcadia Incorporated. I, too, take photographs for the computer desktop.
Hi, I'm Claudia L., virtual being and landscape photographer with Arcadia Incorporated. I take photographs for the computer desktop.
I will start by saying that I have an appetite for life-free, timeless landscapes. I have been programmed to seek beauty by always walking west.
I think my personality can be defined by one phrase: in touch with nature. I am a process-oriented photographer, and my artistic practice stands as testament to my ties with nature. I am programmed to follow the wind.
I am fascinated with the bucolic, and a strong advocate for the power of beauty in conveying ideology. My photography aims high, as I am programmed to find the highest point in my surroundings, and photograph nature from above. Once I reach the absolute peak of the landscape, I seek serendipity by following the sun for a while.
Yeah, so there's this really interesting way that Cezar has sort of imbued all of these agents with their own personalities and just their own unique ways of navigating this land. So like it said in the video, Ansel will always head west, Claudia will follow the wind, and Ralph will climb mountains, will climb to the highest point in the surrounding, and then follow the sun after they've reached the highest point in all of the land. And so these agents, for all intents and purposes, live and occupy this digital world of Arcadia Inc. And are employees of this company in the same way that any of us would be employees of the jobs we work. And I think there's a really interesting conversation with how there's completely digital landscape and these completely digital characters create photography to be used reminiscent of our own physical world. And that sort of like breaches out of their digital world and is used by us in our own facets and creates its own contexts around something that has been so synonymous with our physical world up until that point. And so throughout this exhibition, we've been showing live runs of Cezar's simulation. And so 3 have gone by so far, but there's one more planned for tomorrow at 7 p.m. So I urge you all to check it out. It's really beautiful. I just dropped the link to Cezar's Twitch in the chat. You can just tune in there at 7. I believe it usually runs for about an hour and a half, if I'm not mistaken. And it's got this really beautiful music playing over top. You get to see the agents interacting with the environment itself and just see the live process of how these photos are captured. So I encourage everybody to check that out. Moving on to our last piece. This is Pack Tracer by Andy Wallace. So Pack Tracer is a exploration or just a visualization of the AI that exists in the retro video game Pac-Man. So you can see here, all of the lines represented in the graphic on the right are of the ghosts from Pac-Man, with the yellow one being Pac-Man himself. And so this piece sort of explores the AI in Pac-Man as one of the first one of the first true video game enemy AIs, and also how every ghost in Pac-Man actually has its own unique code as to how it tracks the player character. So none of them travel towards the player character in the same way. They all have their own unique method of movement. And so Andy has removed the combat from this game and says in his artist statement that it makes it more of a waltz than it does a battle, which I think is really beautiful. And I thought this piece was really interesting in the way that it imbues, or it's just an exploration of how we as humans in charge of technology imbue these digital beings with our own interpretations of humanness and our own interpretations of feeling and emotion and intent. The ghosts in Pac-Man, for all intents and purposes, have will. They have their own unique wills that define all of them from each other, which is something that I thought was really interesting as a part of this piece. And moving on to our last piece, which I realized this text at the bottom is wrong, I just realized, but is an upcoming screening. So you won't find this on the website, but this piece is Sedovanic by Primordial Dismemberment. And it's going to be an upcoming screening that we have on the 27th. and is I don't want to say too much because I really want everybody here to come out to the screening and see it. And you'll understand more about how this piece fits into the themes of the show, because it really is a great complementary to everything that you've seen so far. But just to give you a gist, it starts on this intergalactic base with this AI who wakes up and then is sort of trying to piece together the narrative of what has happened here. And I figured I'd close off this talk by just playing the trailer for this work to further incentivize everybody here to come and watch it. So we're going to do that.
And you left the store early, Commander. I really wish you were here to see it. It's just like home. It turns out we were looking for it in all the wrong places. It was always right here, waiting for us, long before we even arrived. A whole world, and an ocean of time. Just a few meters beneath the ice.
Yeah, so it's a beautiful film. And I really recommend that you all come out. So the screening will be happening next week, Thursday, from 7 till 8:30, and it'll be streamed on the Interaxis YouTube, which I just dropped into the chat. And there will also be a Q&A and an artist talk by Primordial Dismemberment happening after. So yeah, I encourage everybody to come out to that. And with that, I thank you. Feel free to reach out to me on social media or email if you have any other questions. And thank you so much to everybody for coming to my talk. I really appreciate the turnout, and I hope you enjoyed.